Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to show you how to draw a cat, and if this is something that you've been trying to draw but you've been having trouble, I'm going to go through the proportions for drawing a cat, how to get the right texture, and also how to get contrast so you can get these really nice contrasty eyes. So if that sounds good to you, keep watching. So when I'm drawing a cat, I actually like to start with the eyes. And so the reason that I do that is that I actually find that it's easier to get the right proportions when you start with the facial features, as opposed to just drawing the face and then kind of hoping that you can place the eyes in the right spot. So that's what I'm going to show you first. So what you want to do when you make the eyes is I'm using my pen to go around the ridge of the eye. And the thing with the eyes for cats is that they tend to be a little bit different than human eyes in that they're a little bit more angled and they angle upwards, right? Like towards kind of one of the ears. So you want to get the positioning right whenever you're drawing the eye. And, I just start by going around it and kind of mapping out where everything should be. And of course, with humans, we have whites of our eyes, but with cats, their eyes are actually kind of dark on the inside usually. So I'm working from a reference photograph, and I noticed that the eyes are pretty dark. So I start by just adding some darks to kind of like not the iris, but the area around the iris. And with this, you can notice that I'm going in like the direction sort of mimicking the direction of line. And now I'm actually going to just be drawing the iris, and I start by kind of mapping out where I want some darks. Now, whenever you're drawing eyes, and this goes for both any type of eyes that you're drawing, the most important thing with eyes is that you get contrast. So contrast is basically having a strong variation between really dark darks and lights. Like that's what gives it that glassy look. So if your eyes just kind of look flat and uninteresting, it's probably that you're lacking in contrast. And so what you want to do whenever you're drawing an eye is you want to preserve some of those highlights. So you just preserve the highlights by simply not going over a specific area that you decide is going to be the highlights. And whether you want to actually map that out like with a pencil to make sure that you don't go over that area, or just kind of keep in mind that as you're going you're not going to go over it, either way is fine. You want to just make sure that you preserve those highlights. So that's how you're going to get the best look when you're doing any eye drawing. Again, whether it's a cat or another animal or a human, that principle is going to be like what you need to know for eyes. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how I do the other eye, but before I do that, what I want to make sure that you understand is the proportions for eyes. Now, similar to humans, the distance between the two eyes is the length of another eye, right? So if you have your eyes either too far apart or too close together, it's going to look weird. So you have to make sure that you get the right distance in between the eye before you start with your pen. So I recommend actually using, you know, something to measure and actually make sure that you have that distance in between those two eyes. That will help you so much. And this principle goes for humans too. So humans also have people have a distance of one eye in between their eye like that, right? So that's something just to always keep in mind and make sure that you have that correct so that you don't screw up their proportions. And again, as you can see, it's angling up towards one of the ears, right? So you want to make sure that the angle is also correct. You don't want your eyes to be level like they are with humans because that's not the right shape. So you want to make sure that you're getting those correct details. That's going to help so, so much in your drawing. And so I want you to look really closely at, if you're drawing a cat, notice the ridge around the eye, and that shape is very specific. And in some areas it's like flat and some areas it's rounded. So you want to look for those kind of details. The shape is very specific to a cat, and that's again what's going to give it that cat look, right? So you want to use the eyes to your benefit to make it look really realistic. So now I'm just going in and I'm adding some pen to make it look a little bit more realistic and a little bit more contrasty. And again, here, I'm making sure to keep some area with the white of the page because again, I want that contrast to match the other eye, and I want it to look that kind of like glass-like texture that an eye has. So you want to make sure that you're preserving a highlight. And here, like, I don't actually draw the highlight in there, but you can do that. Like, if that helps you to kind of keep an area where you're like certain that you're not going to go over it, just do that. Make a little circle around the highlight and just make sure that you preserve those highlights. So when I'm drawing, I tend to put marks down, and then as you want to keep making something darker, you're just going to layer more lines over it. So obviously, like, the more lines that you put, the more, dark it's going to get, the darker it's going to get. So, this is just the basic principle of cross hatching, which, I talk about in all the different drawings that I do with pen and ink, because you don't want to overwork your eyes. You want to kind of like step back from it from time to time and just kind of make sure that it's looking, you want it to look resolved and look really good, but you don't want to overdo it. So, don't keep going so much that then you darken up everything and you don't have any more midtones. So you want to keep some areas that are really dark, some areas that are midtone, and some areas that are highlight. And that kind of goes for any time you're doing cross hatching drawings. Like that's kind of like a principle that you always want to think about, is how you can get sort of a mix of those different tones, right? So very darks, midtones, and lights. And what I also like to do when I'm drawing the eyes is draw some like hatch marks kind of around the eyes. You've noticed that I have some lines kind of going around the eye as well. And that kind of integrates it into the surface. So it's not like the eyes are just kind of plopped on there, but I'm going to do a lot more with that when I'm starting to do the fur. But as you can see, I'm kind of like going over it a bit, and then I'm sort of like adding some lines around the eyes as well. Okay, so now you're going to do the fur. And when you do the fur, what you want to think about is the direction and the pattern that it's going in, right? So you don't want your lines just going any which way. You want them to kind of help shape the form. And so what I'm doing is I'm kind of going around the eyes to sort of show the pattern that kind of has, like, for a cat, you have that kind of pattern around the eyes. So whatever you're drawing, you want to look at like, what is the fur actually doing? You don't want your lines just going in any different directions. When you're using your marks and your lines, you want to have quick sort of like wispy lines. That's going to be the most sort of like fur-like. So you don't want to press down really hard. You want to practice sort of like light wispy lines for that, quick lines. And so if you're using pen and ink, you'll have to kind of get into the habit of giving a lot of patience. So a lot of this is just a lot of sort of like time spent with layering. So that's something that, I'm going to speed this section up a little bit, but it's just lots of sitting and layering. And, you can't really rush it. So you want to be layering your lines and just kind of try to get that patience that is necessary for this kind of drawing. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to make a triangle going from the corners of the eyes to the nose. And that triangle is going to be an isosceles triangle. And so remember, an isosceles triangle has two equal sides. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to shape the nose. And it's basically like a T-type shape. So it's very different than a human nose. It's got kind of like, this sort of like T-shaped, but then it's sort of rounded at the bottom. And then for the mouth is much smaller than the other features. And then the chin is, of course, much smaller as well. So, notice that the features are very different, where they, they kind of like get smaller towards the chin in terms of their sizes and proportion. And whenever you're drawing proportions, the things that you want to notice are things like this. Like I'm looking at in order to get where the mouth ends, I'm looking at how it kind of compares to the nose. So notice those kinds of things, and that will really help you when you're figuring out proportions, because proportions is really difficult. So that's kind of like the hardest thing about this kind of drawing, is that you want to get the proportions right. Okay, so now I'm just penciling in the chin. And again, the chin is like way, way smaller. Like the face structure is so much smaller at the bottom than it is at the top. That's what gives it that cat face. So you want to notice those kinds of relationships in terms of like how much space is there from the nose to the bottom of the chin. And those kind of relationships are going to really help you in terms of getting the correct proportions. And if you've made it this far, you should really hit the subscribe button and become a subscriber so that you can follow along for more tips. So thank you for doing that, and I hope you're enjoying the video so far. So now we're going to talk about how you can shade the nose. So for the nose, what you want to do is you want to think about the texture is different, of course, than the fur. And so you want to use different types of lines than you are with the fur and the eyes, because the texture is, of course, different. And then I'm also shading that ridge in the nose. There's kind of like a ridge halfway between it. And so you want to shade those kind of details as well, because that will help make it more realistic. There's also a lot of shading underneath the nose as well. And whenever you have dark values, like just dark shading, it kind of helps pop the light areas forward a bit. So make sure that you get that level of contrast in your drawing. That will really help make it look more realistic. And you'll notice also that around the nose, I'm also kind of like doing similar thing of what I did with the eyes, where I'm using lines to kind of integrate it into the surface of the face, right? So that it's not just like the nose kind of like plopped on there. You want to kind of use lines to kind of integrate it into the cat face a little bit more. So the set of pens that I'm using are called Micron pens, and I'll link those in the description. These are the pens that I use for a lot of my drawing, and I really like these pens. They're very versatile, and you can get some really good effects with them. So I wanted just to go back to this idea of the direction of the fur. So as you can see here, I'm kind of going around the eye again to kind of like show the fur pattern. So all the different areas that I'm drawing, I'm trying to think about what the pattern would make sense. So you want to think about that with whatever you're drawing. If you're drawing fur, you want to think about the direction that your lines are going in. And again, not just have them going in all different random directions. So another common mistake that people make when they're drawing is they put a kind of like a harsh outline around whatever they're drawing. So if you're drawing a cat, you don't want to put an outline around the face. What you want to do instead is use your lines and your hatch marks to show kind of like the fur as the edge. So again, see that is instead of just drawing like a harsh edge around, I'm using lines and the actual fur pattern to show that that's the edge of the face. Okay, so in the fur, there's also kind of like a stripy pattern at the top of the head. So that's another area where you want to just layer your lines to get like if the cat you're drawing has stripes, you're just going to put more lines and more layers over those areas to show the stripes. Okay, so now I'm going to do the whiskers. And for this, what you want to do is kind of just like find the point that you want to go from and sort of like fling your hand really quick. And so you're not pressing down very hard. You're just kind of want it to be really like light and wispy. And you don't need to feel like you have to draw every single whisker that the cat has, right? Because even just a few kind of give it that impression of having whiskers, because those lines are so different from all the other lines that you've drawn so far that you don't need to overdo it. So I want to just kind of mention that. You want to also make sure that you do the whiskers that are kind of near the nose, but also there's the ones that are kind of like up sort of where like, I don't think the cats have eyebrows, wherever that is, towards the top forehead part of the cat. Okay, so last I'm blocking in the ears. And again, I kind of penciled this out a little bit. So I kind of like knew early on that I'm like, yeah, I have the proportions the way that I want them. But for the ears, what you want to do is you want to look at the distance from the ears to the eyes and look at some of those kind of relationships so that you make sure that you're not drawing the ears either way too large or way too small. So this is another place that people sometimes struggle with. So again, like whenever you're drawing a cat, you want to think about like some of the relationships and the distances in terms of the proportions. So the main ones are, getting the eyes right, getting the nose placement right, and getting the ears right. And I would say that going back to the nose, I think that usually when people kind of mess up, they make the nose too long, actually, like the distance between the eyes and the nose too long. And then it looks a little bit more like kind of like a mountain lion. So those are the kind of things that you want to kind of play around with. So last thing, I'm just kind of going over the ears. In this area, I'm doing a little bit of a different type of line, a little bit longer hatch marks than I was doing with the fur. And so I just, at the end, I start kind of like refining and looking, kind of step back from the drawing and look at it and sort of see, what do I want to change and, make those kind of like final refinements and adjustments. If you're working on learning how to draw fur better with any type of animal, I'll link to in this video to another video that I recently did on how to draw different types of fur where I drew leopard print, cats, dogs, rabbits, hedgehog, a bunch of different things. So check out that video if you're working on drawing fur and you want a longer tutorial on how to draw fur. Put in the comments any questions that you have and what you're drawing. Let me know what you're drawing. And if there's a specific other type of animal that you'd like me to do a drawing on, sometimes I do take the comments and I do a drawing around whatever the comments are. So thank you again for joining, and I will see you next time.